Hello, it's Jonathan at the piano lesson. How you doing? Hope you had a good week. And last week we talked about this interesting Beatles tune, Day Tripper. And I thought I would just touch on a few more points on that song because it was so interesting how seemingly very simple song is actually a lot more sophisticated than we think, and we're almost playing in two keys at the same time, and that whole concept, the whole concept of jazz, as opposed to classical music, and I'm generalizing, right? I'm just generalizing, but when you're playing a jazz tune, even though you're in a particular key, you're not in that key for very long. Typically, you transition out of it. What do we mean by a key? Well, we're using notes of a scale. Could be any kind of scale, but typically it's a major or minor scale, and usually we stick with those notes for quite a bit of time. So if you're playing a piece by Mozart or Beethoven or even the Beatles, or a Christmas song, usually we're dealing with kind of like a set of notes that repeat. But in the case of jazz, the reason why it's so interesting is because we're really doing what Bach did when he celebrated the advent of temperament with the well-tempered clavier. So for those of you who are not familiar with the well-tempered clavier, it is a groundbreaking work, important work, consisting of 24 preludes and fugues in all the major and minor keys, 12 major keys, 12 minor keys. And Bach wrote systematically in chromatic order, which is kind of interesting that he did it in chromatic order and not in fifths, but okay. And it was a celebration of temperament. So what is temperament? Well, it's in the common vernacular, one's temperament, right, has to do with whether or not you might be calm or quick to anger or happy or whatever. But in music, when we talk about temperament, we're talking about kind of a deal with the devil. I call it a deal with the devil, but we're talking about reconciling all of these keys so that they can exist on one instrument, because unbeknownst to most of the people playing music, each key is in itself a world unto itself. It's really hard to reconcile all of these keys. But before Bach's time, before 1600, it was, if you wanted to change key, in many instances, you would literally have to rebuild your instrument in the middle of your performance. You'd have to, if you're playing the horn, you'd have to tear out parts of the horn and put others back together. There's some very interesting videos on YouTube about different ways of tuning a piano. So when we're tuning an instrument, what does it mean for something to be in tune? That's kind of a loaded question. It's a simpler answer when we're dealing with, say, two trumpet players. So two trumpet players that are playing the same note at the same vibratory frequency, and they reconcile, they're congruent in that you don't hear vibrations between them. If you compare two notes that are in tune, it will sound like one person playing. But if one of those notes, one of those musicians is a little higher, a little lower, you will hear vibrations, dissonance between them. And so that is a simple way of thinking of tuning. On the piano, it becomes more complicated because you have a very wide range, right? We have 88 keys on the piano. That's much wider than any real instrument, for the most part. And there's a method to the tuning. I think some people refer to it as stretch tuning, but the idea is that there is a psychoacoustic effect as well as it's not purely logical, arithmetic. I mean, the overtone series and I am not an expert on this, but it is geometric. It's exponential, and so as an example, if you take a pitch and you double that pitch, so A 440 above A above middle C, and you go an octave higher, well, you double the pitch and you get 880, right? Or if you go an octave lower, it's 220, right? That is an octave on paper, but if you tune a piano that way, it's not going to sound real good because the upper notes, the higher notes, are going to sound flat. They're going to sound a little too low, and the lower notes are going to sound sharp, a little bit too high, and it's going to sound squeezed together. And so good tuners know how to do this, and they put a little what's called a roll in their octave. It's kind of they're just slightly out of tune, and then they test the octaves, not just within an octave, but 2 or 3 or 4 octaves to listen, so they can kind of reconcile it all. But when Bach wrote his Well-Tempered Clavier, now the word well, I'm not pronouncing it as German as they would in German, but the word well in English means something different. We don't mean something that's done, that someone did a good job. It is a methodology. It's a way of reconciling pitches. And there were many different forms of temperament along the way. There was mean temperament and just temperament. And eventually we got to something that we call equal temperament. And but that was kind of a miracle. The whole idea of temperament was kind of a miracle in that it allowed the performer and the composer to kind of slip in and out of keys seamlessly. And that's quite remarkable. And that's really the whole thing about jazz also. Think of it almost like a camera lens that kind of goes in and out of focus, and you have that depth of field, and you sort of change the aperture, and you can see things in the background and the foreground, or you have a wider aperture, and now you can't see the background. You can only see the what you're focused on, or the background's blurred, and that kind of thing. But in sound, that's what we're dealing with, and it allows for all of these interesting tunes to come about. But there are interesting videos on the web as piano tuners have tuned pianos in some of these ancient tunings. And honestly, I don't think anyone really knows what they sound like. I mean, we don't have recordings. I mean, I guess there is, if you're a scholar, I'm not a scholar of that, but if you are a scholar, I imagine there are treatises and all types of manuals that describe things. Who knows how accurate they are. Again, if you don't have a recording, and that's the thing about music. Like, there really isn't a long history of recordings as we have in written texts, right? Written texts, we have a long history. But just a slight difference in pitch from major to minor. The slight major keys really having a different quality than minor keys, and that's why Bach would write in one key over another. One composer would write in one key over another, because they were in those systems of temperament. The distances between the notes, while they were similar, they were not precisely the same proportionately, where in our modern system, it's much closer to that. These semitones, or half steps as we call them. And of course, not every musical system uses semitones, right? If you go to India, they use quarter tones. Good luck hearing quarter tones, right? I mean, we'd hear quarter tones, I suppose, but actually playing music with quarter tones, well, we do. Not quite in the same way, but that's why we do have instruments where you can change the pitch on the fly, which you can't do on the piano. Although we have interesting modifications on keyboard instruments where we can have effects, where we have a pitch variation, chorusing and flanging, and all kinds of interesting stuff on electric instruments and organs, and we have vibrato and that's not really quite the same thing. What do we have? What was I thinking of? Tremolo. Tremolo. I was thinking of tremolo. Tremolo is really amplitude modulation, so it's like having your hand on the volume control, as opposed to vibrato, which is a variation in pitch. All these ways we modify pitch ever so slightly, and it does make a big difference. It really does. And so getting back to this Beatles tune, um, it really quite kind of fascinated me. I heard this arrangement on Phil DeGreg's CD. It was a really interesting recording, and of course, then I had my own ideas. And someone who's wasn't, didn't really grow up with the Beatles. I mean, I guess I did. I guess I had, some Beatles records, but I was, I was I didn't go to Beatles concerts. Let's put it that way. I did see Beatlemania, though. Beatlemania was a Broadway show many years ago. I was thinking it was the early 80s, late 70s, something like that. And it was quite impressive. So I kind of remember seeing these fake Beatles. By the way, what about that urban myth that Paul McCartney actually died in a car accident and he was replaced by someone else, and there are all these clues, kind of like the moon landing never existed, and they could tell because like his hair was combed, was parted like the wrong way, or he was playing the bass on the wrong side, or some such thing, and this idea that the guys in the band knew but they wouldn't tell, and instead of calling him Paul, they referred to him in the media as Fall, because the real Paul was killed in a car accident. And it was all a plot by the Tavistock Institute. Yeah, you didn't know that? Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall when the Beatles were in India with Mia Farrow. That would have been interesting. So here's what I find. Here's what I find interesting. Let's get serious here. Come on, we're here to learn something, right? We're just clowning around. All right, let's do it. Here we go. The Day Tripper uses two sets of chords, two sets of primary chords, E, A, B. Okay, that's 1, 4, 5, right? And it uses C sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. Or if you want to spell them as flats, be my guest. But they're all those are 1, 4, 1, 4, 5, and we're used to hearing them in a certain way, right? 1, 4, 5, 1 in E, and 1, 4. What are we doing here? Had a little momentary lapse there. So that's what they would typically sound like, right? But what ends up happening is they're kind of mixed up. So we start out in E, and it goes kind of back and forth to A, and then it suddenly goes to F sharp. It kind of goes really. That's an unusual transition in the sense that it ends up on C sharp. So we have. It ends up on, it goes to F sharp, and then it goes kind of back to gets to the G sharp, A, and then it resolves. That's the you have that half step relationship above 5. If I did that in the key of E, it would sound like this. It's not, yes. That's what it would sound like in E. Now, there are no C chords in here. But the interesting thing is you have these two sets of primary chords. How do you guys read that? I should have been a doctor. I could write prescriptions all day long. Going from C sharp to E is a minor third. Okay. Going from F sharp to A is a minor third, right? And going from G sharp to B is a minor third. And that's kind of how I hear this tune, and that's how I think you should look at it and learn it. It's that interlaced idea is is really what it's about. And I just think that's fascinating. I can't think of really any songs that really do that quite the same way. And I just wonder, like, where did they get that idea from? And of course, I also thought about, typically it's played with an E major chord. But I just like the idea of, like, I like the idea of using that pentatonic, that black, the glisses. And then I like that. What am I doing there? That chord, that's an 11 chord, but the way to think of it, instead of A7, I'm using, you could notate it like this, kind of a shorthand, B minor 7, and then A7 in the bass, right? So you have this sound, right? Now A7 would ordinarily be this. That's not really going to sound very good, and you're going to have that dissonance right there. Usually, here's the 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's see, what are we doing here? 9, 10. That would be the 11 with the 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the 11. Usually, when you have the 11, you don't play the third. It's just not a great idea. Yeah, the G, that's the 7th, absolutely. The 5th, well, you can kind of take it or leave it. It's kind of superfluous, if I switch them around too. That's kind of a fun way to play a chord. If you have to repeat a chord, playing something similar but not exactly the same, that kind of keeps it sounding fresh. Even here and here. That's sort of an interesting idea you could use. What was I doing here? Yeah, that wouldn't work. So the tune again is. Now, I like just kind of a bluesy, sliding down the note. Another 11 chord, G sharp minor 7 over F sharp 7. And my point was, I neglected this, you omit the 3rd and the 5th, I think so. The chord will sound brighter, just like this. If I put the 3rd in, it'll sound awful. The 5th, I think it gums up the works. Same with here. That's nicer. Day tripper. Now watch this. I could do it in parallel. One-way ticket, yeah. I take some liberties. But that parallel motion of all this is F sharp minor over E, and this is G sharp minor over F sharp, and this is up, A sharp minor or B flat over A flat. And I like doing octaves, but I like adding an extra note. I like tripling the melody. That's particularly good if you're playing live, and you, rather than trying to beat your body up and try to force sound out of the piano, just reinforce it. But doing this, that's ridiculous. That sounds like, Tchaikovsky or something, right? But that's really good. That really works. This tripling the melody. So now here's the cool chord. That's a sharp 11 or a flat 5. and this is 7. That's very cool. That's the whole thing about jazz. You know, the tonic in most music would be this, but here the resolution is on the dominant. It just has this really badass mean sound, and then B7. But the tune, even though it starts on E, or I was doing this last time. I think I was doing. But that's a nice sound. It's more like how a guitar player would play. Yeah. Here's another G over G major over, and this is a horizontal line over A7. Or not a horizontal line, a diagonal line rather. And I think yeah. So the song is actually in the key of C sharp. That's sort of the big surprise with this song. You know, it's one giant deceptive cadence is really what it is. So what's a deceptive cadence? Deceptive cadence is just that. It's when you deceive the listener. You kind of, it's like a slider in baseball or a curveball. You know, you throw them a curveball. You're not going to throw it straight down. And all of a sudden your ear goes, and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. So I really want to know where that pattern came from. I mean, it can't be the first use of that. I'm not exactly sure. But this snaggletooth, I call it a snaggletooth kind of relationship. And if you go from C sharp up to E, okay, well, that's a minor third. If you go down, right, that would be a major sixth. I prefer thinking in terms of minor thirds. But this, you know, this. Listen to that scale I made out of this, and I'm making my own customized scale. My own custom scale. Watch this. Voila! Okay. Let's do that in treble clef. How about treble clef for a change? We're so sick of bass clef. But, so C sharp, E, F sharp, A, and then I'm going to go backwards for a second. G sharp, B, and then C sharp. So C sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, and C sharp. Now what does that sound like? Well, it sounds like this. Now, what is that? I'm not precisely sure. Since we're skipping, we're avoiding the D sharp. You know, we're making it a bit ambiguous, but it sounds an awful lot like a Phrygian mode in the key of A. Here's A. Here's the Phrygian mode. But this kind of throws a wrench in it. And of course, when you play it in order, straight through, it doesn't have quite the same effect as if you do this. Now, we always think of scales going systematically up, but why can't you have a scale like that? I mean, I think that makes more musical sense, frankly. And going down, but I'm not exactly sure how one would descend. Um, I mean, would you want to do precisely what you did going up as you would going down? Um, and you have that note to sort of figure out a pattern for. So if you're improvising, it sounds very ancient, doesn't it? It kind of has that modal sound. Now we're thinking about whenever we're talking about soloing, people think about, hey, what notes should I use? Okay, well, those are organically derived from the tune itself, right? Those are notes that come right from the tune. So when you improvise, it's going to sound related to the tune, but also it's not so much what notes you should play, it's what notes you should avoid. And I think in this case, even though the D natural might technically kind of work, I think we should avoid it. I think this song, in a sense, has this sort of modal sense to it. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, because the tune just has this, on the E and we'll have to explore the melody a bit more, and I just don't have the time to do that right now, but we could probably come up with some other interesting modes and scales. Well, I got to run. Good to hang out with you guys once again. Keep a stiff upper lip, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for all the support and the emails and the posts, and I enjoy that very much. So take care. Bye-bye.